I was raised on refried beans and bedtime stories told between double shifts. My mom, Janine, wasn't the kind of woman people wrote books about. She was too busy living the story. Apron, always stained hands, always dry, but her eyes lit up every time she brought home a wrinkled travel magazine from the diner's lost and found bin. Look, she'd say, pointing at some distant blue coastline, they say the water's so clear you can see your own feet. One day, that's where your story will begin. We never had much. Our mobile home in Yuma creaked when the wind blew too hard, and the AC worked only if you hit it twice and prayed. But Janine made that house feel like possibility. She taught me how to budget a week's groceries with two $20 bills and a dream. She never lied about how hard life was, but she never let me believe that poverty was a cage. I got accepted into 2 state schools. Janine cried when the envelopes came. I didn't go. Not because I wasn't proud, but because I saw the math. Her knees were starting to give out. The diner's tips were drying up. I told her I'd take a year off. Then I got a job booking tours for retirees going to places she used to point to in those magazines. By the time I turned 25, I was fluent in travel codes and client drama. The agency was tiny, but I was building something quietly. I had a spreadsheet called Proof of Love. Each row was a bill I paid a gift I sent a vacation I saved up for. I didn't tell Janine, but I'd started putting away for her future too. That's when I met Emil. I was giving a talk at a regional tourism conference in Flagstaff. He held the door open for me with a quiet smile and asked, "Is this the right ballroom for the dreamers?" We ended up seated at the same table during the networking lunch. Emil, with his calm voice and concierge charm, didn't talk over me like the others did. He asked questions and listened. By the end of the weekend, I knew he wasn't like the men I'd grown used to. He didn't flinch when I told him I skipped college. He said, "Maybe you just took the direct flight." And somehow that's how I boarded the journey I didn't see coming. The first time Emil brought me to Santa Barbara, I thought I was just meeting his relatives. His parents were warm in that practiced coastal California kind of way. Polished, polite, a little distant. Their house smelled like citrus candles and old wealth. Photos lined the hallway, golden-framed snapshots of graduations, ski trips, christenings. I smiled politely, nodding along, until I paused in front of one. The man in the photo had a face I recognized not from memory, but from the battered folder Janine had shown me when I turned 18. It held my adoption papers, a single baby photo, and one candid shot of a man she'd called Bernard. He wanted something different, she'd said quietly, like it still stung. And I wanted you safe. Emil noticed me staring. "Oh, that's Bernard Talbot," he said casually. "Old friend of my dad's. Grew up together. He lives out in Montecito now." The air left my lungs. Talbot. The name on my birth certificate. The name I never asked to reclaim. A week later, I stood on the porch of a home that looked more like a vineyard estate than a house. Bernard opened the door himself. His eyes flicked over me, and then something registered. Eveline, his wife, appeared behind him, dressed like someone used to magazine spreads and catered brunches. "You're her," she whispered, hand to her chest. "You're really her." They invited me in like they'd never missed a birthday, like they hadn't signed away their rights to me before I could speak. Bernard poured tea like it was a ritual. Eveline clasped my hand and said, "We've been waiting for you to come home." I nodded slowly, unsure what kind of home she meant. They asked questions about my childhood, careful ones, as if walking around a landmine. I told them the truth. Janine gave me everything that mattered. They smiled, but it didn't reach their eyes. Eveline mentioned they'd tried to reach out years ago, but the timing wasn't right. Bernard added that Emil's parents had recently reminded them. I wondered if it was guilt or curiosity that brought them to the table. Still, a part of me ached to believe this could be real, like blood had finally recognized me as its own. When Eveline asked if I'd consider staying with them for a while, I said yes before my doubt could catch up. Their house was the kind of place where footsteps disappeared into rugs, thick as clouds. I rolled my suitcase across imported stone past tall vases and curated silence and told myself this was temporary. Just a few months. I could work from anywhere, and maybe, just maybe, this would stitch something whole inside me. Eveline welcomed me with a glass of lemon water and a comment about how refreshing it must be to take a break from whatever it is you do. I smiled tightly. Luxury travel planning, I said, setting up my laptop at the end of the long walnut dining table. I run my own platform. She blinked. Oh, like influencer trips. Her voice dipped on the word influencer like it had something sticky on it. Bernard hovered in the background. He offered to help bring in my bags, then disappeared for the rest of the afternoon. I got the sense he preferred newspapers to people. Emile tried. He'd stop by when he could leave me handwritten notes on the fridge. "You're amazing. You belong here." But I could feel his tension too, how he shrank a little when his mother made veiled comments about online businesses or kids who think laptop jobs are real work. At night, I worked late while the house went still. The platform was expanding honeymoon packages in Greece, solo retreats in Chile. Clients trusted me. My name meant something in spaces Evelyn had never stepped into. But in that house, I felt like a guest wearing borrowed shoes. One morning, I overheard her on the phone in the kitchen. She's sweet, but a bit unpolished. No formal education. Self-taught. I stood behind the pantry door, stomach clenched. She said it like I was a project she never signed off on. Still, I convinced myself it was progress. At least they were trying. At least they didn't send me away. I started picking up groceries without being asked. Paid the gardener's invoice once when it sat too long on the counter. Quiet things. Easy to ignore. By the time Eveline invited Emile to plan a family vacation to Italy, I'd almost believed I was part of something permanent. It started with dishes. Not mine, just the ones left after Evelyn's brunches with friends or Bernard's midnight snacks. At first, I didn't mind. I was living in their home after all. It felt like the respectful thing to do. But then came the laundry, then the vacuuming, then reminders written on little yellow sticky notes. Towels and guest bath need folding. Windows streaked, "Please wipe." They never said it outright, but a pattern formed. When I worked quietly in the dining room, Evelyn would float past and murmur things like, "You're still on that computer," or "Must be nice to work in sweatpants and call it a job." Once, as she passed behind me, she laughed and said, "I remember when women had real careers." I tried to let it slide. Emile told me not to take it personally. "They're just old school," he'd say, kissing my forehead before heading out to his concierge shifts. "They don't mean anything by it." But it did mean something. Every sideways glance chipped away at the confidence I had built. I kept telling myself that if I contributed, it would ease the tension. So I quietly started helping out financially. I paid the internet bill one month when it nearly lapsed, covered the landscaping crew's fee when Bernard forgot. It was easy enough I'd just transfer the money and delete the email notification. No one noticed, and that almost made it worse. I told myself I was smoothing the rough edges, making myself easier to love. Maybe if I kept the house clean, if the roses outside bloomed, they'd start to see me not as a guest, but a daughter. The work piled up both in the house and on my business. I was booking multi-continent honeymoons and six-figure corporate retreats while also cleaning the grout Evelyn said was slipping from pristine. Most nights I stayed up late toggling between spreadsheets and to-do lists. I'd sit at my desk, the only light on in the house, sipping tea I bought, but no one thanked me for. One night, Evelyn mentioned over dinner that she and Emile were planning a summer getaway. "Just the two of us," she said, smiling at him. A chance to reconnect in Italy. The lasagna was steaming, the silver polished, the wine poured. It should have felt like a celebration. Evelyn wore her usual pearl earrings, the kind that made her look even more composed when she said cruel things. She passed me the bread basket like nothing was coming. "We've decided," she said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, "on a little getaway. Emile and I. Just the two of us. Italy this summer. It's long overdue. She said we like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away." I blinked. That sounds beautiful. "When are we going?" Her smile didn't break, but her eyes sharpened. "Oh, sweetheart, this is a mother-son trip. Just us, some family bonding. You understand?" I stared at Emile waiting. He looked down at his plate, cut into his food. "That's surprising," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I thought maybe we were starting something together." Evelyn sipped her wine. "Italy's fast-paced, sophisticated. It's the kind of place that rewards polish and pedigree." Her tone was sweet enough to rot fruit. I laughed, but it caught in my throat. "Are you saying I don't belong on that trip?" She tilted her head. Well, it might be overwhelming for someone without formal travel experience. Or a degree. I turned to Emil again. You're okay with this? He sighed. Let's not make this a thing, Soraya. She meant well. You know how Mom is. I pushed my chair back. No. I know how you both are. No one stopped me. Not when I walked into the kitchen. Not when I stood at the sink, palms pressed against the granite. I didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside me buckled like the foundation of a house, shifting an inch at a time. Unseen, but undeniable. Later that night, Emil knocked on the door quiet. You're being sensitive, he said. It's just a vacation. He called it just a vacation. I nodded, not trusting my voice. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing I wasn't part of the family. I was just convenient. A warm body to clean the floors, pay the bills, and smile politely while they planned a life I was never meant to join. I didn't sleep. I watched the sky shift from ink to ash, my heart stuck somewhere between disbelief and decision. By morning, I wasn't angry. I was clear. I found them in the kitchen. Evelyn slicing fruit into perfect triangles, Emil scrolling through his phone like the night before, hadn't cracked something wide open. I want to talk, I said, standing in the doorway. Evelyn didn't look up. If it's about Italy, we've moved on. It's not about the trip, I said, steady. It's about how you treat me. Like I'm a guest in my own life. She paused, then turned slowly. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I've worked. I've contributed. I've tried. And none of it has ever been enough for you. Her smile thinned. You don't pay rent. You don't cook for the family. You work from home if you even call that work. Honestly, Soraya, you're a drain. A drain. A leech. I turned to Emil, hoping. You know that's not true. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting anywhere but mine. Maybe you just need space. Time to cool off. I swallowed the lump in my throat. So that's it. He didn't answer. I walked upstairs and packed slowly, just my laptop charger, a pair of jeans, my passport. I left everything else, including the cardigan Evelyn had given me for Christmas that still had the tag on it. At the door, Evelyn stood with her arms crossed. Good luck scraping by. I didn't flinch. I didn't look back. The moment I stepped outside, something in my chest loosened. Not freedom exactly, but the first breath of it. I slid into the driver's seat, gripped the wheel, and didn't cry. I was done crying in houses I didn't belong to. And as I pulled out of their driveway, my phone buzzed with a new booking. A client in need of a 2-week itinerary through Greece. High end. Last minute. Just like that, I remembered who I was. The girl Janine raised. The woman who built something from nothing. The one who never needed their permission to belong. By the time the call came, I was watching waves curl into shore outside my window in Maui. My platform had crossed the 7-figure mark. I had a small team now, 2 assistants, a brand manager, and a developer in Lisbon. Most days, I worked barefoot from the lanai, sending couples to Greece, CEOs to Peru, and newlyweds to dream islands they hadn't even known existed. The ringtone was unfamiliar, but the area code wasn't. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. I picked up curiosity beating out caution. Hello, Soraya, Evelyn's voice ragged. Thank God! She choked on the words. We're behind on everything. Power water. The gardener quit. Credit cards are maxed. Emil's job can't cover it. I thought Bernard was... She trailed off. I let the silence hang a moment. I stopped paying when I left. She froze. What do you mean? I stood and walked to the edge of the balcony. I mean, for the last 2 years, I was covering everything. Quietly. Utilities, groceries, landscaping, the Lexus maintenance plan, the $400,000 in debt on your Amex mine now until I stopped. But you never said anything. No, I said. I thought maybe if I just gave enough, you'd finally see me as part of the family. There was a long pause. Then Emil's voice came on the line, lower, desperate. You have to help us, Soraya, please. I didn't raise my voice. I did. You just didn't know it. He exhaled sharply. You're serious. I'm in Maui, Emil. In my own home. Fully paid off. and this call. On your dime, it's international. I hung up, not in anger, not in vengeance, but because sometimes the only way to reclaim your power is to let them hear what it sounds like without your silence. We met in a lawyer's office in West Hollywood, neutral ground beige chairs, too much air conditioning. Emil looked smaller than I remembered, paler, like the weight of everything had finally settled into his face. He didn't say much, just signed where he was told. I had already signed mine. When it was done, he sat back and stared at the folder in front of him. "I thought you'd always be there," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. I nodded. I was. Until I realized I was never seen. He looked up then, and for a second I could see the man I once loved. The one who made me laugh during airport delays and whispered in Spanish at sunset just to impress me. But that version of him had only existed in spaces where I wasn't being erased. I didn't know he said, voice breaking, just a little. "The money, the house, I didn't expect you to." That was the problem. I stood. "I don't hate you, Emil, but I can't carry people who keep cutting off my wings." He reached for something, maybe a word, maybe my hand, but I stepped back. "I wish you peace," I said, and I meant it. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Outside, the sun was bright and indifferent. I slipped on my sunglasses, exhaled, and walked toward the curb where my driver waited. I didn't look back. There was no part of me left in that chapter. Janine stepped into the villa like she didn't want to disturb it, like she wasn't sure if she belonged in something so quiet, so clean, so far from everything we'd ever known. Her suitcase had one good wheel and a frayed ribbon tied to the handle. I carried it inside anyway. She walked through the front room, fingers grazing the white walls, the curved banister, the linen curtains dancing in the breeze. Her eyes watered before she said a word. "You made this," she whispered. I nodded, throat tight. "For us." We stood there, both of us suspended between everything we'd survived and everything still waiting. I thought of all the nights she went without dinner so I could eat, the way she stayed up to read library books by flashlight when the power was out. How she never asked for anything but always gave more than she had. Now she was here. Her bedroom overlooked the sea. Her robe hung in the closet. Her name was on the lease. She walked out to the balcony, pressed both hands to the railing, and took a long, slow breath. I didn't know it could be like this. I wrapped my arms around her from behind. Me neither, but now we do. Inside, the kettle whistled softly. I poured us tea and set out 2 slices of the banana bread she liked. She laughed, real and full. That night, we ate barefoot at the kitchen island, the windows open and not a single apology between us. Leora found me through a mutual client, a honeymoon couple I'd sent to Bali, who happened to attend one of her destination weddings in Oahu. She reached out with a voice note, "Soraya Talbot. Is that really you? Tell me you still eat tacos like it's a food group." We met at a beach cafe halfway between our offices. She looked exactly the same, just more radiant, like someone who stopped asking for permission to shine. We hugged too long and then didn't stop talking for hours. She told me about the firm she built from scratch, about flying her parents out to see the ocean for the first time. I told her about Janine, about the house, about everything that shattered and what rose after. "We really did it," she said, raising her glass. "From borrowed textbooks to beachfront contracts." I laughed. "From gas station nachos to 5-figure packages." We toasted to every teacher who underestimated us, every invitation we never got, every room we weren't supposed to walk into. Then we ordered dessert because neither of us believed in only taking what we needed anymore. Later that week, she asked if I'd consider partnering on a new package for women traveling solo. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. The waves outside my balcony crash with the kind of rhythm that feels like truth. I sit with my tea inbox open, new bookings rolling in like tides. A letter catches my eye, handwritten, tucked in with a client thank you gift. "You helped me take my first trip," it says. Not just on a map out of shame. I run my fingers over the words, heart full in a way money can't measure. I place the letter next to a photo on my desk, Janine in her garden hat. Leora mid-laugh, my team huddled on a Zoom screen smiling. None of them share my blood. Every one of them helped save my life. I don't think about the house I left behind. I don't need to. They tried to make me small, but I took their table and built a shoreline. My heels clicked softly against the marble as I slipped into the back row of the ceremonial courtroom. No one turned when I entered, and that was fine. No one expected me to be here anyway. I settled into a seat no one had reserved, folding my hands in my lap, keeping my gaze low. Up front, my parents were impossible to miss. My father's posture was straight, his suit pressed within an inch of perfection. My mother's pearls caught the light each time she tilted her head to whisper to the woman beside her. My younger sister, Corinne, sat between them, radiant with pride as she prepared to take her oath. Every detail was arranged as if for a portrait, the golden child about to be sworn into the Massachusetts bar, the proud parents glowing in reflected success. I caught fragments of their voices. At least one of our children didn't give up, my mother murmured, her lips tight but smiling. My father raised his chin a fraction higher, as if the words themselves polished the family's image. I didn't flinch. I'd heard variations of that phrase for more than a decade, long enough that the sting had dulled into something else, an ache that never quite left, but no longer broke the skin. To them, I was the failure who had walked away from Harvard Medical School, the one who cracked under pressure, the one who couldn't keep up. That narrative had settled like dust in every corner of our family's life, repeated often enough that it became truth to everyone but me. I let them believe it. It was safer that way. Corinne straightened as the judge entered, and the room rose to its feet in unison. The judge's voice carried across the chamber, but my mind drifted, tugged backward by memories that had become all too familiar. I could see the long oak table in our dining room at home, polished so carefully that the chandelier reflected off its surface. Corinne always sat at my father's right hand, her posture immaculate, her smile timed to perfection. I sat a little further down, a shadow at the edge of the family portrait. Corinne's professor said she has the makings of a litigator already, my mother would announce, her pride swelling until it filled the room. Laughter followed, glasses clinked, and all eyes turned toward her, the promise of the Rowan name carried neatly in her hands. Then came the inevitable comparison, a pause just long enough to remind everyone of me. Of course, Celine is still finding her way. A polite chuckle, sometimes a sigh. Once, an uncle leaned across the table with a smirk and said, "Better to quit early than to waste more tuition." My father didn't correct him. He just pressed his lips into a line and refilled his wine. Even the silences carried weight. When Corinne passed her ethics exam, the family toasted with champagne. When I withdrew from Harvard, no one raised a glass. My name became shorthand for disappointment, woven into jokes too sharp to laugh at. I learned to school my face, to butter my roll without trembling fingers, to let their words pass through me as if I were glass. What they never knew, what they were never meant to know, was that the moment I stepped away from their world, another door had opened, one they couldn't imagine. The gavel struck lightly at the front of the room, pulling me back to the present. Corinne rose with confidence, ready to take her oath, while I remained in the shadows, carrying the truth that none of them had ever bothered to ask for. There was a time when my name at Harvard Medical carried weight. First-year anatomy, neurophysiology, pharmacology. I devoured them all. My professors praised my focus. My classmates whispered about my grades. I lived in the library, slept with flashcards under my pillow, convinced that if I kept my head down, I could carve a place for myself in a world where precision meant everything. It unraveled the day I opened the wrong folder. At first, I thought it was a filing mistake, a memo tucked into a research summary that had nothing to do with it. But the numbers didn't lie. A funding stream traced back to a pharmaceutical company, tied neatly to a faculty member's name, and to a grant that had guaranteed one of my classmates a prestigious clerkship. It wasn't just sloppy, it was intentional. I took it to the ethics board, certain I was doing the right thing. Within a week, my access to internal systems was revoked. A professor who once praised my surgical simulations now refused to acknowledge me in the hall. Study partners drifted away, whispering behind their hands. The girl who never faltered was suddenly the cautionary tale. When the call came, it was from an unlisted number. The woman on the other end spoke calmly, her tone professional but not unkind. She told me she worked with a division inside the Department of Justice, one that specialized in medical ethics and corruption. They had been watching my school. She said, watching certain faculty, certain deals, and someone like me observant, unwilling to look away, might have value. If I was willing to leave one world behind and step into another, I signed the withdrawal papers the next day. My parents thought I had cracked under the weight. My mother asked if I was pregnant. My father refused to speak to me for weeks. But by then, I was already filling out clearance forms, already memorizing case files, already stepping into a life that required silence. Corinne's oath echoed in the present courtroom. But my mind held another vow, the one I had made in secrecy, to serve justice in the shadows. The day I left Harvard, the story my family told about me hardened into stone. To them, I was the one who cracked under pressure, the daughter who had wasted her potential. They never asked questions after that, never wanted the details. It was easier to fold me into silence, to make me the shadow to Corinne's light. That shadow became my cover. On paper, I was a research assistant drifting between private firms, a dropout who never quite landed. In reality, my days were spent in windowless rooms with sealed files, tracing the invisible veins of money that fed corruption. I sifted through records of clinical trials padded with ghost patients, hospital boards approving experimental drugs in exchange for quiet donations, doctors receiving kickbacks for prescriptions that harmed more than they healed. It wasn't glamorous. Some nights blurred into dawn under fluorescent lights, my eyes raw from hours of reading ledgers. Other days I walked into hospitals under an assumed name, clipboard in hand, smiling like any junior analyst while cataloging violations that could collapse entire systems. Every file I touched had real lives buried inside patients whose trust had been betrayed, whose suffering had been monetized. That weight never left me. But the job demanded stillness. No recognition, no applause, no trace of my name. If I was successful, the public never knew. Cases closed quietly, indictments sealed, whistleblowers protected by signatures no one would connect to me. I wore anonymity like armor, because exposure meant risk, not just to me, but to the work itself. At Christmas dinners, when relatives asked what I was doing, my father would say, "She's in research now. Nothing to do with law." They nodded, half listening, before turning back to Corinne's latest achievements. I smiled, offered polite answers, and let them look past me. It was safer that way. Years passed in this rhythm. My family's disappointment calcified, but so did my resolve. Silence became both shield and weapon, a way to exist in their world while living fully in another. And so, on the day of Corinne's swearing in, I slipped into the back row unseen, carrying 12 years of secrets in plain sight, until the judge stepped to the podium and met my eyes. The room shifted when Judge Harold Stone stepped forward. His presence carried the same weight it always had: broad shoulders, a voice built for authority, a polished smile that had charmed neighbors and politicians alike. To my family, he was a friend of decades, a man who had dined at our table and raised his glass at holiday toasts. To me, he was the central figure in an ongoing investigation, his name traced across offshore accounts and illicit donations hidden behind shell companies. I sat perfectly still as he adjusted his papers, beginning his remarks with the kind of ease born from habit. He congratulated the candidates, reminded them of the sacred duty of ethics, wove words together with the confidence of a man who believed his image unshakable. My parents watched with pride, my father leaning forward as if these were words he himself could have written. But then Stone's gaze lifted, sweeping across the rows until it landed on me. For a moment, his practiced rhythm faltered. Recognition sparked, quick and sharp, followed by something else, awareness, perhaps even guilt. I held his stare, just long enough to acknowledge what we both knew, before lowering my eyes. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Then, unexpectedly, he cleared his throat and set the papers aside. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice resonant but edged with strain, "I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone present today, someone whose integrity reshaped my view of law, though not in the way she may have intended." A ripple of confusion spread through the courtroom. Stone's gaze settled firmly on me. "Thank you, Dr. Celine Rowan." The words struck like a gavel. The air changed instantly. Heads turned, necks craned, whispers erupted, then died in the weight of silence. I saw my father's hand tighten around the arm of his chair until it trembled. My mother's breath hitched audibly, her posture frozen. Corinne stiffened beside them, her confidence cracking into disbelief. I did not move. Years of training kept my face calm, my breathing even, but inside, every instinct sharpened. I had come prepared for many outcomes, but not for this being seen in a room where I had been invisible all my life. Stone lifted his papers again, resuming the speech as though nothing had happened, but the courtroom would not forget, and neither would my family. When the ceremony ended and the applause began, I knew the reckoning I had avoided for years would come before the day was done. The reception hall hummed with the usual polite chatter and clinking of glasses, but beneath it ran a different current. Conversations faltered as people glanced my way, then looked quickly back as though they hadn't. I stood near the edge of the room, a glass of ginger ale untouched in my hand, watching trays of hors d'oeuvres circle past. It didn't take long. My father's voice cut through the crowd, low but commanding. "DOJ." Since when his eyes pinned me from across the room, sharp and searching, the same look he used to level at witnesses on the stand. I didn't flinch. Since Harvard, I answered evenly. I was recruited during the ethics investigation. I didn't drop out. I was asked to leave one world to serve in another. For a moment, there was only stillness. My mother's hand shook as she adjusted her bracelet. Her lips parted, but no words coming. She looked as though the ground beneath her had tilted. Corinne stepped forward, her expression tight, her voice edged with something between curiosity and disbelief. "That DA case last year, the one with the sealed indictments, was that your team?" I let the question hang before replying. "The prosecutor flagged in that case was on our radar 2 years earlier. Let's just say you weren't arguing alone." Her eyes widened, the certainty in her face flickering into something more complicated. My father exhaled, a slow, measured breath that sounded like it belonged in a courtroom. He was recalculating everything he thought he knew, every word he had ever spoken about me in disappointment. My mother finally spoke, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "We thought you were lost." "I wasn't," I said gently. "I was doing exactly what I was trained to do. You just weren't allowed to know. No one applauded. No one cried. But for the first time in years, no one looked past me either." The silence was heavier. Yes, but it was the kind that acknowledged presence, not absence. And as the evening thinned, I knew the reckoning wasn't finished. It would follow me home. The house felt smaller than I remembered. The walls, once looming and untouchable, seemed worn at the edges. The colors faded. My mother disappeared upstairs without a word, her footsteps careful on the carpet. My father remained near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze heavy but unreadable. When my mother returned, she carried a cardboard box, its edges taped and yellowed with time. She set it gently on the coffee table, smoothing her palm across the lid before peeling it open. "I kept these," she said quietly. "I don't know why. I just couldn't throw them away." Inside lay pieces of a life I had been forced to abandon. My Harvard ID badge, bent at the corners, A folder of commendations I never showed them, notes from professors about clerkships that never came to pass. Beneath the stack was a thin envelope, still sealed. She handed it to me with trembling fingers. This came last year. No return address. We didn't know what it meant. I slid the paper free. A certificate from the Department of Justice, intentionally vague, recognizing service in matters of national integrity and judicial security. Nothing explicit, nothing traceable, but real nonetheless. My father stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the page as though it were a declassified file. His jaw tightened, then slowly eased. "You protected people like me," he said finally, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "And I failed you." He extended his hand, not the gesture of a father reclaiming authority, but of a man offering respect. For a moment, I hesitated, then placed my hand in his. The grip was steady, and it carried weight I had waited years to feel. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. But it was the first crack in the wall between us, and I knew more would follow. Weeks later, I walked through the side gate of my parents' backyard without hesitation. Folding chairs lined the lawn, neighbors balancing paper plates on their laps, children chasing each other near the fence. The smell of charcoal and lighter fluid hung in the air, the same as every gathering before, but this time I didn't linger in the driveway or wait for someone to notice me. I carried a dish of berry crumble and placed it on the table as though I had always belonged. My father spotted me first. He straightened from the grill, not stiff with formality, but tall with pride. "Everyone," he said, drawing the attention of his circle of colleagues and old friends. "This is my daughter, Dr. Rowan, Department of Justice." There was no hesitation in his voice, no careful pause to soften the introduction. Just fact. A few heads nodded respectfully, and the weight of it settled quietly into the air. I hadn't expected applause, and none came, but the absence of dismissal felt like a kind of ceremony all its own. Later, near the cooler, Corinne found me. She carried 2 plates stacked high and offered me one with a crooked smile. For a moment, she studied me, her expression caught between pride and something sharper. "All this time," she said, "I thought I was carrying the family's name. Turns out you were carrying the weight none of us could see." Her tone wasn't bitter, but it wasn't free of envy either. I met her eyes and held them, letting silence answer what words couldn't. She laughed softly, shaking her head, and handed me the plate. The sky darkened into shades of rose as sparklers flickered in the hands of children. For the first time in years, I wasn't outside the circle watching. I was in it, on my own terms, and the night felt different because of it. In the quiet after the gathering, I sat alone on the back porch, the sound of laughter fading into the hum of cicadas. For years, my silence had been mistaken for surrender, my absence written as proof of failure. I let them believe it because the truth was too heavy to explain, and because the work demanded shadows, not spotlights. Now, with my father's words still echoing, "This is my daughter, Dr. Rowan, D.O.J." I understood how easily a single sentence could rewrite years of judgment. Yet, as warming as that recognition felt, I realized I hadn't been waiting for it. My worth had never depended on their applause. It had been measured in the whistleblowers I protected, the patients shielded from fraud, the cases closed without fanfare. Recognition from family was new, fragile, and welcome. But it wasn't the foundation of my life. The true foundation was built in sealed courtrooms, encrypted files, late nights chasing trails that no one would ever connect to my name. That was where justice lived, not in their approval, but in the quiet victories that never touched the headlines. I thought back to the girl I once was, bent over her medical textbooks, believing success was defined by titles and degrees. She would never have imagined that the greatest measure of her life would be invisible to those she loved most. But perhaps invisibility had been its own kind of shield, until now, as the last sparkler fizzled out in the yard. I stood, ready to step back into a life where the applause didn't matter. Only the work did, and I knew the story wasn't finished. Not for me, not for them. I thought back to that first moment in the courtroom, sitting alone in the back row while my family whispered about failure. For so long, I had let their story define me, the daughter who quit, the one who couldn't keep up. I carried that silence like a burden, but it had been my shield, too. Now I understood what those years had really meant. Silence wasn't surrender. It was discipline. It was the space that allowed me to do the work no one else could see. It was the cost of protecting what mattered. When Judge Stone spoke my name, the narrative they had clung to cracked apart for the first time. They saw me not as the girl who disappeared, but as the woman who had chosen to walk a different road. That recognition mattered, but not in the way I once imagined. What mattered was knowing that even in silence, I had never abandoned myself. Dignity doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sits quietly at the edge of a room, waiting for truth to arrive. Sometimes it looks like weakness until the moment it stands and cannot be ignored. I no longer needed to prove my worth to them, or to anyone. The life I built in shadows was enough, and time had spoken for me, because in the end, truth doesn't whisper. It waits, it endures, and when the moment comes, it speaks so clearly no one can look away.